Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to our channel at Grade Level Reading. On LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, follow us at Campaign for GLR. And on X, follow us at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to share anything you learned from today's webinar, and we will be sure to repost. We encourage you to share any questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be helping behind the scenes. Before we start, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our enterprise and our programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the GLR community. I also want to take a moment to thank our Leo sustaining sponsors, who you can see on the screen here. Thank you for your dedication to allowing us to have these weekly conversations. And before we jump in, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping details. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city, or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select everyone so that we can all see each other's chat messages throughout the webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respond to those questions you post, and our panelists will be typing out answers throughout the conversation as well. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as slides, bios, and resources, will be sent in a follow-up email to all who registered. And lastly, we will be posting a brief on-screen poll during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And before we jump in, I just want to turn your attention to some of our upcoming webinars. Next week on January 20th, we have an exciting doubleheader, starting with a funder-to-funder conversation at 12:30 Eastern Time, focusing on putting families at the center of the equation, shaping the future of education. On the 20th at 3 p.m., we'll have a session on how tutoring works, lessons and insights from local programs and practitioners. That will be part of our Big Bets Working series. And again, focusing on big bets and on tutoring, we'll be having a session on the 27th at 3 p.m., focusing on high impact tutoring as a remedy for pandemic lost learning, focusing specifically on the LA settlement. More information and registration links will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope that you will register and join us. And with that, I am excited to welcome all of you to today's conversation, Beyond Disruption, What Comes Next for U.S. Education Policy. It's great to see so many of you already in the Zoom room with us on our first Tuesday back to live sessions in 2026. We all missed you during the holiday break, and we're glad you're back. Before we begin and before we jump in with our panelists and our moderator, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge and call attention to CGLR's continuing concern that our children and their health and safety and well-being could become casualties of ongoing turbulence and toxicity in our world and in our communities. As a reminder for folks, CGLR does hold this to be important, and we are going to be posting a link in the chat to a webinar conversation about the stressors associated with the threats of mass deportation. That conversation took place in 2025, so we'll be posting the link in the chat now. If you want to go back, take a look, and see what our brilliant panelists said during that conversation. And with that, I am excited to introduce our moderator, John Gompertz, Executive Fellow with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. He will be navigating through the conversation with our brilliant panelists, and we'll be introducing them shortly. John?
Thanks as always, Sierra. And hello, friends. Happy New Year. I hope everyone got some sort of a good break over the holidays. And as Sierra said, welcome to our first Campaign for Grade Level Reading webinar of 2026. We're delighted you joined us today, and I think we have a great session ahead. You may recall 12 months ago, we opened 2025 with a look ahead at what to expect. We had no idea how 2025 would unfold. So we asked a group of friends and experts to make a few predictions, and even more than playing that prediction game, to suggest what to watch for in the coming year. Well, needless to say, a lot happened in 2025. and even now in the first days of 2026. We know that the effects of some of the actions are being felt throughout our network already in things like attendance, family stability, and engagement. No doubt there will be new issues that arise this year, but part of 2026 will also be about seeing how certain open issues are resolved or things that are resolved at a policy level, things that have moved from ideas to policy are now in the implementation phase. So that's a lot to talk about, and we'll touch on all those items. I'm going to invite our guest to join me in just a minute here. But first, a couple of items and requests for you. Um, the release of the newest NAEP results last January was one of the most important developments for 2025 for those of us who focus on early learning and on the profound disparities in educational progress between those who are doing well in school and those who are struggling. You know that the campaign has devoted an enormous amount of research, time, effort to understanding those NAEP results and what they mean. In all, we held 9 sessions, 15 hours of discussion about the NAEP results last year. We captured rich content in the course of those discussions and including from audience comments and questions. Rather than leave all that good stuff on the table or to the vagaries of our memories, some of which may be fading a little bit, the campaign has put together a report on the big ideas and themes that emerge from those conversations. And we just published this report. It's called The Nation's Report Card, a call to action for raising achievement and closing gaps. It's on the Leo website. We're posting the link right now. And we hope you'll find this publication useful, a good resource, a good reminder, and a good resource. We have a couple of requests about the paper, though, beyond just suggesting that you read it. First is to share it with colleagues. However you do your sharing, text, email, social media, whatever you like to use to share important information, we will hope you will use those vehicles to share this report. Second, we want to have an ongoing discussion about the issues and ideas raised in that report. So we're hosting a conversation on LinkedIn and very much hope you will engage in that conversation. Post your comments, post your questions, post resources, engage with others. Of course, you know, the way that we proceed in the campaign with respect towards all kinds of views, we hope that will carry through in the conversation on LinkedIn, but we'd really like you to join there. We also put the link to the LinkedIn. We put the link in the chat, so you can find it there. A couple of quick notes before I invite our guest to join me. First, as we all know, the concerns of the campaign and this network zero in on the specific importance and challenges of early learning and to the ongoing and growing disparities in educational progress between those who are doing well and those who are struggling. The phenomenon that our friend Mark Schneider referred to as the bottom falling out. There was a lot of action on so-called education issues last year. But aside from the NAEP results and the reaction to those results, not so much of that action and attention went to early school success or to narrowing or eliminating gaps. So let's together make sure that today's conversation really focuses on the policy moves and policy questions that have a particular impact on early learning and closing gaps, especially for kids from economically challenged families and historically marginalized communities. Second, this session is not about being curious bystanders. It's about getting the information and ideas needed to do our work. We're looking for practical insights, especially about what we can do in our communities to drive greater success around early school learning. Third, we're super thrilled to hear from this group of experts, and we want this group of experts to hear from the CGLR network as well, to be informed in their work by the give and take with all of us today. So we will run and respond to a couple of polls in the course of this session, and I'll be asking for questions into the Q&A box throughout the session. So Last thing before we dive in. As I said, this session is designed to be heavy on audience participation. So, in that spirit, and given that we're a network devoted to reading, after all, let's do a fun little exercise that involves all of us. I'd love it if everyone would put in the chat box their favorite book that they read in the past year. It can be War and Peace. It can be a children's book. It can be a graphic novel. It can be fiction, nonfiction. Just what did you read and love in 2025 and think all of us should read? And to get you in the swing while people are posting, I'll just tell you, I just saw it go by. My two favorites were The Correspondent by Virginia Evans and Canticle by Janet Rich Edwards. Our guests should also feel free to post their favorite books. And I've asked Sierra and our genius producers to capture the results. We'll try to publish a top 5 or top 10 vote getters during this session, or if that proves too difficult, we'll include the results of the summary in the email that we send out at the end of the week. Okay, I love watching those. Love watching those book titles go by. Thank you all for that. Okay, thanks for indulging me, and I'm looking forward to finding my next great read among your recommendations. With all that, let me introduce our guests, most of whom are quite familiar to you, and then let's get into it. As always, full bios are linked in the chat, but I hope by this time you feel like these folks are friends to all of you as they feel like to me. So we have with us today, and please join us now, on screen, Jean-Claude Brizard, the President and CEO of Digital Promise Global, Denise Fort, the President and Chief Executive Officer of EdTrust, Robin Lake, who's the Director of the Center on Reinventing Public Education at ASU, and Mike Petrilli, President of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, all regular guests on this show. So let me start by asking all of you this. We can't really fully understand what lies ahead in 2026 without a quick look back at 2025. So thinking especially about early learning and early school success, what two developments would each of you think were the most influential and important in the current landscape that happened in 2025? Robin, let's start with you today.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Great to be back, and thank you all for joining. Thanks for the great work that you're doing out there on the ground. Well, there's so many things to choose from. It was such an exciting year. I guess the thing that really rocked my world this year as a researcher was seeing the end of a $900 million worth of research that was put a stop to in the Institute of Educational Sciences, and the scaling back and pausing of much of the NAEP program, the national assessment that you were just talking
Yep.
about, John.
Yep.
And this group knows the importance of evidence. I don't need to provide a lecture on that, but I think it's the amount of research that was underway and could have been underway to get us closer to understanding the interventions that are needed, especially in the early grades, to keep kids on track and to provide teachers with the state-of-the-art instructional strategies is just really heartbreaking. And I think, the thing is, it really, the move had ripple effects throughout the research community. Many researchers have been laid off, are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives, and most importantly, a lot of good work has come to a halt. I will say that I really believe IES needed to change. Changes were needed, so I'm not arguing that status quo was perfect by any means. Hopefully, this will be an opportunity for real shifts. And I guess that the second piece, I'll just say briefly, I'm sure others will say more about this, but the chilling effect that we've seen through through many moves at IES in the research community, but also through executive orders around around words like equity, inclusion, etc. So the way that's playing out in the evidence space is people no longer put in proposals for work anywhere in universities that have the word equity or really talk about equity forthrightly. Even using different terms is very tenuous, and I'm just really feeling that right now. I'm just really feeling like, how do we, my organization was founded on the idea that we're doing evidence building to help the most vulnerable populations. How do we navigate a space that's become very, very tricky and still pursue our mission of figuring out what works?
Well said. Thanks so much. Denise, what do you think?
So I follow Robin wherever she goes, and I just completely agree with uh, what she said. There's no doubt it's been a tough year at the federal level, and the implications downstream are heartbreaking when you think of families and students that need uh, supports and help, whether it comes to complaints that they need to file through OCR and are not getting help there, to, the withholding of over $7 billion last summer that really impacted summer programs and after school programs. And, those can't be stood up readily. It takes time to build an infrastructure to support kids readily and in a wholesome way. And so that too was certainly disappointing. But, I am an optimist at heart, John. And, what we did see in many states is that they continue to pursue uh, work that needed to be done.
Mhm.
Sometimes unevenly. We get that when it comes to like the science of reading and stuff like that. But in other places like Texas and what they were able to do relative to teacher support, Massachusetts and what they were doing in terms of educator diversity, New York in literacy, California just passed that great literacy bill with the support for English language learners, Michigan and their student funding formula. So I'm optimistic that when given the opportunity, folks are able to do the right thing. But I still have concerns, like if the feds are to step away from certain things, civil
Mhm.
rights, English language learners, homeless education, the Iowa waiver that we just saw approved.
Yep.
um, we're gonna have to keep our eye out because um the reason the feds stepped in on so many of these issues, migrant children, homeless children, um, English language learners, compensating for property taxes. That's the reason the feds stepped in because the states weren't doing it. So we definitely have to be vigilant, but vigilant and optimism, that's okay. That's a good pairing.
That's good. That's good. Mike, thoughts on big things that happened in 2025?
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree with everything Robin and Denise said. I, Let me go with an idea that sometimes bad news is good news.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
There's
like,
an optimist for you.
well, there you go. People watching the stock market always are like, oh, the economy's doing poorly. That means interest rates are going down. Stock market will go up. Look, what I saw happen this in 2025 was that finally some opinion leaders in the world outside our little world here that we are all a part of woke up to the fact that achievement in America has gone down dramatically, and that achievement gaps between the lowest and highest performing kids have grown. And that wasn't just a COVID story, but that it actually started before COVID, more like in the, early to mid 2010s. And I'm thinking about newspaper op-eds by, center left and center right writers in the New York Times and the Atlantic and all of the elite press. And
Yeah.
so to me, that means that the opinion leaders in the country are waking up to the fact that we have a crisis here. And I think that's significant because, in my mind, that is the first step of getting the country as a whole to wake up to this, and importantly, to get politicians and policymakers to start acting on it. And so, we'll talk about 2026, where foreshadowing, I think the big question is, whether any presidential candidates decide to
Mhm.
run on education reform. And I'm hopeful that if this drumbeat continues, the discussion about both the achievement declines, but also the Mississippi Miracle and the Southern
Mhm.
Surge, and this notion that, hey, things have been bad, but there are a few states doing things that are, beating the odds. If that drumbeat can continue, I am more hopeful that maybe there'll be some candidates out there courageous enough to run on education reform again, and that's going to be critical to us turning this around.
Fantastic, Mike. We'll come back to a bunch of those things. I saw, by the way, a question about the waiver. And Denise, I want to come back to that and get everybody to talk a little bit about the Iowa waiver, what it actually specifically means, but what its potential meaning is over time. And as I said at the top, people should post their questions as we go here. Don't wait till the end, and we're going to try to work them in. And for I think for our guests, what people ask about is extremely important. It's a pulse on what the most active and paying attention people in communities are most concerned about or most curious about. Jean-Claude, you batting cleanup on the
Oh,
the wrap up of 2025. What did you think were the big things that happened in 2025?
John, thank you. I'll try not to be repetitive. First of all, I agree with everything that's been said. I'm surprised no one mentioned AI, which has been the two letters you hear every place you go to. Let me just maybe mimic Robin a bit by saying that no one can do R&D like the federal government can do R&D. No funder, no one can do this. We are a leader in this in the world, and to see that gutted was really sort of disheartening. In many ways, telling me that we are beginning to outsource our leadership in the world when it comes to research and development work. When you think about the science of reading, for example, I mean, this kind of stuff came from really good research that is now hopefully being implemented across the country. As an aside, I'm beginning to hear expressions like science of math when I ask people, please don't say that. There is no such thing. It is not baked in real science, so leave that alone. Um, you know, the movement to states, in terms of giving blocks of money,
Yeah.
worries me a bit because, again, we know many states are compliance machines, and that when you look at, again, I think who said it to about English learners? It was you, Denise, talk about English learners. As a former, maybe still current English learner, I worry a lot about our population, and frankly, the support they're going to be getting from states across the country. But perhaps the one thing I'll add to the conversation that's been a little worrisome is the bans on books, the rewriting of history. Again, mostly coming from the state level, but at the same time coming from the federal level, is concerning. That folks are not able to teach history and make sure that we're all represented in the teaching of history, and to watch things being erased in books, etc. It really is a bit worrisome.
Yeah, that's all really that's great. I want to Jean-Claude, something you said about tying the research to
Mhm.
the whole movement towards the science of reading. It feels like there's a very important argument there in support of ongoing funding of big research. Like, oh, we're all doing a particular thing right now that we think has potential breakthrough power, and that emerged from federally funded research. That feels like the argument rather than some sort of abstraction about we need to know more and so forth. So, Mike, I'm really interested in what you said about the narrative or the big story. And it feels to me like there's something important here for community leaders to capitalize on, or funders, or whatever to capitalize on, that maybe this issue, this concern, is creeping back up the levels of how concerned we are and into the right areas. Maybe the ground is a little bit more fertile for people to talk about education as a big issue, and generate maybe money, but maybe attention, focus, accountability. Talk a little bit more about how you think some of those articles and some of that thinking could start to bend the arc a little on what's happening in communities.
Yeah, no, I agree, John. I mean, look, first of all, let's be honest. It is hard to compete against the daily craziness coming out of Washington. And so I'm not saying this is easy, right?
Yeah. Right.
But I do think if you pay attention again to, some of the debate and discussion, especially among the policy elite types, one message is that a lot of things went wrong during the pandemic or leading up to the pandemic. You saw murder rates ticking back up again, and life expectancy going down, and overdoses. We had that terrible crisis, and there's a lot of those bad trends have turned around. Actually, that things are, in terms of social indicators, moving in the right direction again, as they were for many decades. Education is the one exception where we have not yet seen much good news in terms of achievement turning around after what happened before the pandemic and after. So one point is to say, hey, we've been successfully as a country, as a society, solving some of these other problems, and education is one of those issues that remains unsolved. Let's focus on it. I think the other key thing to remind people is that it was not long ago that we made tremendous progress as a country for kids, right? From the mid 90s until about 2010 or so, huge gains in achievement, especially for low income kids, especially for Black and brown kids, 2 to 3 grade levels of progress in math, tons of progress in early reading. So we were at a time when things were really moving in the right direction. It wasn't just education reform. Child poverty rates were down. There was more generous social safety net stuff happening. But all of that meant we were doing better by America's kids. And so that wasn't so long ago. We can do it again. I think those kinds of messages are the ones that we need to start reminding. People, you got to raise the issue. You got to kind of have some anger and like, what the heck is going on out here? And standards have collapsed, and we're just giving kids diplomas they can't read. That's part of it, but you also have to give people hope. And I think the hope comes from some success in other policy areas, but also some success, not that long ago on education.
And some success that we've seen in some states and communities.
Yes, that's right.
Denise, like this is not impossible. It's really
right.
Your not impossible message is extremely
Mississippi,
important. Right? Yeah, right.
John, can I add a piece to that? So I love what Michael is pushing. So like the Mississippi Miracle, is it a miracle, or was it really a coherent sort of approach to instruction and teaching, right? Leveraging science, right?
That's great, Jean-Claude. It's not like it wasn't fairy dust. We're not looking for fairy dust.
And that's exactly goes back to this idea of hope, right? So we have for example, a hypothesis about innate math and digital practice. So again, I don't have the evidence yet. This is where research really is important. So there's a few of us who tend to believe that the assessment focuses quite a bit on the conceptual understanding of mathematics, right? Where perhaps our teaching is focused too much on the procedural way of teaching mathematics. And the technology that we have in front of kids today leans too much on the procedural, right? And not really aligned to really what good teaching is and good conceptual understanding. So the question would be begged to be asked, those teachers who are really leaning on good math teaching that we know is going on in our schools across the US, are they getting better results? I don't have the answer to that question, but I would venture to guess that where you have good, coherent instructional systems, leaning on really good understanding of mathematics, conceptually. I taught physics. Those kids who came to my class did extremely well because they could extrapolate, they could really take what they've learned and apply to new knowledge. So I think there's a disconnect between what we're teaching, how we're teaching, and what we're assessing. And I think that question, it begs an answer, frankly, to why it is that we seemingly be struggling on NAEP math, as an example.
That's really interesting. Denise, I want to ask you about that because on my list of things that happened in 2025 is, oh, math somehow got on the radar screen. Like we got some momentum going. We got some ideas about what to do about reading, and we've seen some success. But wait, we think the technical term is we suck at math, right? And then, as you say, Jean-Claude, some people just reach for the easy thing. Oh, let's just that bumper sticker that we use for the other thing, let's use that bumper sticker for this. Um, how do we figure out like what next steps are with math? But also, Denise, it would be interesting to hear you talk about the intersection of literacy and numeracy and what it means in early education.
Well, that's why it is so disheartening that we see this lack of investment in research, right? Particularly when it comes to learning. Uh, so many efforts halted, stopped because of the breakdown at the Department of Education. It's really disheartening because there were good things ongoing that we're going to, and hopefully folks will be able to pick it up, but I don't know, teach us more about what we need to know when it comes to instruction and learning. I mean, one thing that we've been thinking about when you look at, and I have to give credit to my friend Arun and Jeff Livingston, who've been thinking about this with us, the lack of infrastructure at state educational agencies when it comes to math versus reading. There's like quite the disparity in terms of both financial support capacity and just expertise when it comes to that. And that has an impact. But we do need more research about, what will accelerate math learning. What do teachers of math need to know? What are the right curriculums? I think we're doing a little bit better there when it comes to
Mhm.
curriculum. Should we be doing the same thing in reading that we're doing in math that we're doing in reading,
Right.
relative to requiring districts to select from certain curriculums? And then, you can't leave out teacher prep. I mean, what
Of
we've
course. Of
learned
course.
there when it comes to reading is, how else are
Of
new
course.
teachers gonna get the expertise other than teacher prep? Same thing goes for
Yeah.
math. So lots to learn, but certainly the lack of investment, the halting of investment
Yeah.
in research and relying on evidence is really quite concerning.
John, could I
Robin, we're
throw
going to put a pin in what Denise said about the teacher prep, but go ahead because I want to come back to that with you later, unless that's where you're headed right now.
Well, sort of. I was just going to say, I put a link in the chat to our annual State of the American Student report that came out in September, and we did a deep dive into math. And I just want to say that, definitely, like we're all talking about the same things here, like, helping people understand how to wade through the ideological math wars as they are and
Mm.
get solid information to teachers about what works and particularly what works for struggling students was
Mhm.
one of our big findings. But we also we did a little dive into the data on teacher preparation and the teacher workforce over the last 20 years, where we've seen the decline in math scores. We've also seen about a 30 percentage point drop in the number of teachers who are coming out of ed schools with a specialization in math or preparation in math. And so, all of us know that a high quality teacher is the biggest influence on student
Sure.
success, and we really have to pay
Sure.
attention to not just the quality of teacher prep that they're receiving pre-service and in service, but also the supply of math teachers. And if we can't change that supply, how are we going to get creative in bringing evidence-based strategies to the table, potentially through new technologies or other means? And I'll just say one last thing, which is I just want to name a tension that I'm seeing in the field around math versus reading, because school districts are really overloaded right now, and many of them have been trying to focus on the science of reading, getting that right, doing implementation well, doing coaching, etc. And many of them have known that they sort of had to put math on hold while they were doing that. And I think the trick right now is, how do we help folks on the ground not lose sight of the hard work ahead to keep good reading implementation going, but also start to do high leverage opportunities around math, because we can't let it be an either or.
Yeah, I think it feels like some evidence, and Jean-Claude, it was a suggestion of that in what you just posted, some evidence that actually this is about thinking and being able to apply thinking, and you need to be able to think to read, and you need to be able to think to do math, and these are not only mechanical skills, they're intellectual skills. So how do we start creating the conditions in which people can develop, young learners can develop those skills? Jean-Claude, I see you leaning in. You're exploding through my screen. So
No.
apparently you want to say something.
No. I mean, again, it goes back to my background as a teacher of chemistry and physics. I didn't teach math, but I really relied heavily on the mathematical skills or the conceptual understanding of kids who walk into my class. I mean, to your point around early learning, I now have a 10-year-old, and I've been watching him learn math from the earliest years, and that's always been my focus. And I said to his teachers, I would rather him understand, for example, that kind of math versus being in calculus by the end of 8th grade, right? Because so many kids walked into my classroom, yes, I'd finish, trigonometry, and they could not do a simple word problem in physics. But when you had those kids who really understood, again, that kind of nature of thinking on mathematics, they excelled. And it goes back into the earliest teaching on mathematics. And again, one of the difficulties we have in early elementaries, we don't really often have teachers who have the expertise, who themselves may have had a bad experience learning mathematics when they were young. So we don't have the teaching capacity often in the elementary schools around mathematics, is the point I'm
Yeah,
trying to make.
I think that's right. I think we're going to come back to the challenges around teacher pipeline, but also appropriate teacher preparation. I know that's something Robin wanted to talk about. I want to transition from 2025 to 2026. What we ought to be looking for, expecting, preparing for. What's uppermost on your mind? And while you all answer that, we're also going to do a poll. There it is, asking what folks who are listening are most interested in at the federal level. Is it funding? Is it this policy or that policy? Is it research? Is it civil rights stuff? So let's see what people say. But Mike, let's start with you this time. What are you looking for in 2026?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned before, by the end of this year, the presidential campaign will be in full swing. You would expect, at least that's what we think. So again, I want to see how many candidates are going to be willing to run on education reform, and especially, frankly, on the Democratic side. Seems likely that the Republican field may consolidate pretty quickly around the vice president. We see, as somebody noted in the comments, Rahm Emanuel has been talking about education reform, and it'll be interesting to see if there's others that do as well. Look, we got a lot done when you had presidents who cared about education reform, Democrats and Republicans. Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were very courageous about willing to, at times, push back on the teachers' unions. Not always, but sometimes, and other education groups, and that created space to get some important work done. Same thing happened under George W. Bush when it came to, calling for a strong federal role in education. So it does matter, both in terms of federal policy, but just as much local, state and local policy. I mean, when we lost President Obama, suddenly we saw Democrats at the local and state level who, for example, supported charter schools, were really, hung out to dry in a way because they didn't have that political cover from the top, from a popular president who was very popular with the base. And so, the opponents of things like charter schools just went to town. So, long way of saying that I think that is going to matter tremendously.
Mike,
Go-
let me push you on that one. Then
yeah.
you can go for another one too. But when you say ed reform is kind of a broad term,
Mhm.
um, what is it that is it actually a specific set of things that you'd like people to run on, or
Mhm.
you're not as particular about what they run on, but that they raise the issue and that we actually have a debate about what kind of policies we would pursue and what our goals are with those
Yeah.
policies
No, I
to
think
get
that's
to the
right. I
point
mean,
about
look,
equity.
I obviously I have my policy preferences as
Sure, of
everybody
course.
does,
And we all
right?
do. Right.
But I think mostly it's saying, hey, this needs to be a national priority. Okay. This is
Hmm.
something that we should be talking about. We have a crisis in
Hmm.
terms of achievement in the country. We need, and our schools, can and need to be doing better than they are. And that the school system, because of all the complexities that we inherited, all of us have inherited this education system that's 100 years plus old. It struggles to make the changes it needs to make without some kind of external pressure. That can come from top down standards and accountability and focus on equity. It can come from some of the bottom up pieces in terms of school choice and competition. But it's everybody who's worked inside the system. Tons of great people know the system itself is a huge challenge, and so there needs to be some external pressure. And all of us who care about public schools and their mission need to be a part of that. So yeah, I think it's raising the issue. It's basically saying, look, I'll be honest. I don't think Donald Trump is an education reformer, and I don't think Joe Biden was an education reformer. Joe
Yeah.
Biden mostly just said, let's spend more money on the schools.
Yeah.
He said, I'm not going to do anything to create distance with the teachers union. So
Yeah.
uh, that's not reform. Uh,
Yeah. Gotcha. Gotcha. Anything else you want to flag for 26 or you want to come back to
I
that
would
later?
just say, and then of course, what really matters is at the state level, we've got a whole bunch of governors'
Yep.
races this year, as we do every 2 years. And so, again, what are people running on? And
Hmm.
does this message break through? Do we see any governors, especially in blue states, say, hey, it's crazy that Mississippi is kicking our butt?
Yep.
Unfortunately, this year in New Jersey, the candidate was instead saying, I don't, people are talking about Mississippi. That's ridiculous. No, the message should be, hey, they're putting us to shame and we need to do a better job as well. And I'll be interested to
Gotcha.
see if we see that at all.
Gotcha. Denise, I want to come to you, and we have a question about Indiana and waivers, and you mentioned the Iowa waiver. So, as a bridge to whatever you want to talk about 26, can you
Yeah,
also just talk about what happened sort of in between 25 and 26, which is this waiver
Sure.
for Iowa?
Sure.
Explain what it is and what you see and what your concerns are.
Yeah. So in this misguided effort by this administration, to return education to the states by whatever that means, they open the door to requesting waivers from states to dictate what they saw they needed to turn things around in their states. So number one, just to, you know, address my misguided statement. Look, uh, for years, states have had, in fact, the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in 2015 gave the states a tremendous amount of flexibility. In fact, invited and listened to them and said, okay, you want to do more? Go for it. We haven't seen that. The unevenness, clearly, I mean, the fact that we're calling Mississippi a miracle means that, it's just one and done. No other, Alabama, Louisiana, okay, great. Three states out of 50. Like, what's going on? Let's do it if you want to do it. As Mike said, if you are focused on changing the directory and the success of your students in your states, go for it. But we haven't seen that, and that's why we
Mhm.
call things a miracle because
Yeah.
it's really you can see it's very challenging for me to have this conversation. Uh,
Yeah.
but going back to waivers, so the feds ask states to come in and apply. uh, they were from first offs, Iowa, Indiana, um, Oklahoma toyed with it, but so far it's been Iowa and Indiana. Um, Iowa just sort of threw a blank page and said, we want to do it all. We want block grants. We don't want to adhere to any federal education laws. We think we can do better. Indiana had perhaps a little bit more on the paper, but there were still conversations. EdTrust has challenges with both of those applications. When it comes to Iowa, the waiver that was just approved, really concerned, and I think I put something in the chat about Iowa's ability to still focus on the students who need supports for which those dollars by law had been directed,
Yeah.
whether it's English language learners or what they intend to do with after school learning. Uh, you know, looks like they get to do whatever they want. So, we'll have to see whether they really have an interest in supporting the students that need the most. Look, when it comes to the reason, again, I said this earlier, that the Fed stepped in on special education, up around reading, around teachers, around English language learners, homeless students, child nutrition at the Department of Agriculture, is because states were not doing the job. They were leaving kids hungry. They were prohibiting kids with disabilities from going to school. They were not allowing children who had English language challenges. They weren't even opening up the school doors. So that should be a problem for all of us on this webinar. And we need to be very vigilant about whether states are going to make sure that all means all, and we leave no talent behind.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Well, I don't see that with this administration, honestly. Whether it's the EEOC and their ridiculousness that they opened the door with in December. Um, if you're a white male and you've been discriminated against, please come see us. Uh, or whether it's, the dismantling of ed or the canceling of all of these grants if they said something about Black children
Yeah.
or women. Uh, so come on. We can do better. We should do better. And look, I would love states to take these waivers and do great things, but 2015, it's now 2026, 11 years. Okay.
John,
Gotcha.
can I just add to this? I mean, I remembered,
Of course.
as a grad student, learning about Jose P. Nichols versus Lau, all these like massive lawsuits
Yeah.
that really provided services for special ed children, provided services for English learners, right?
Sure.
These
Sure.
things
Sure.
came to Denise's point because some districts in the state were not meeting, were not doing the right thing for kids. Look, I mean, if you can, if you have, if again, all these ifs, if you have a state that has capacity, that is innovative, that really cares about every child, the combination of funding from different sources can create coherence and amazing innovation. It could happen, but at the same time, though, most states or most places may not have the best interest of all children. May have children like someone in the chat said, migrant English learners who may not have a voice in the fight with the state to make sure they're represented. You may have some groups being called terrorists and whatever it is, right? That will reduce
But
accountability.
even short of that, Jean-Claude, you mentioned it before. You have, there's either venality or oversight, but there's also just state capacity.
Yes.
I think we vastly overestimate how much capacity there is in states to do this work.
Yes.
And then we want results in very short periods of time, which is probably not
Yes.
realistic.
Hey,
Robin, go ahead.
Just quickly, when I walked into Rochester, New York as a superintendent, 34,000 kids. We had nearly 18,000 suspensions a year. Almost half of them were kids with IEPs
Yeah.
who are violating federal law. I mean, if I didn't care about that population, and quickly, if my board didn't care about going back to a consent decree, I wouldn't have the wherewithal to go battling that overclassification of special ed kids. But you can't expect every system to have that kind of leaning. But the bottom line is, there is a chance for innovation, but a greater chance, frankly, of leaving some kids behind.
Yeah, gotcha. So that's a big thing to watch in 2026. Robin, I want to come to you on 2026. When we talked earlier, you talked about, and there's a question about it, about declining enrollments. And there's also a question about the new tax credits and what they may mean. And sort of I want to talk to you a little about the intersection of these new tax credits that can be used in various ways, and declining enrollment and what that could portend in 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, these are two areas of challenge and opportunity, I think, for states. But yeah, there are a lot of population shifts happening, a lot of enrollment shifts. Burbio has been tracking a lot of um, data, doing web scraping, and just giving up to date enrollment numbers. So it's worth taking a look at what they're reporting. But states and districts are seeing big changes. There are winners and losers. Some of that is district to district. Some of that is public to private, with some of the private tuition funds available, vouchers, ESAs, etc., and now the tax scholarships. So it's a complex environment. I think it's going to be all eyes on states, like it or not, right now. I do think there's a great opportunity for community leaders to drive a lot of this discussion. And I would encourage folks to look carefully at the numbers and the facts, and think about how to how to look for some really interesting reform opportunities. So I think there are
Right.
many just around declining enrollment. We're gonna see districts getting into financial and academic decline that can happen very rapidly with enrollment losses. And I think it's really worth thinking ahead about what we do about school districts that have not been able to compete effectively. They're probably not just going to vanish into thin air, and communities really could drive some interesting solutions there. We'll be doing more on that front soon. With the tax credit scholarships, that's a complicated one that we can dig into if people want. But I think the reality is we'll likely see some red states moving on tax credit scholarships. It's going to be up to states to see what they do. Governors will decide. But it's also going to be really interesting to see if some Democratic-led states look at tax credit scholarships and think about how they could shape them to pursue some of their own priorities and goals. I think there's some interesting opportunities there too. I'll
Yeah.
just throw into the mix, and Jean-Claude raised the question of AI, which is really, really urgent. We really need states to lead on AI policy and help figure out a very complex, rapidly changing environment that's causing confusion on the ground for teachers and a lot of stress for students. So we've got to get that straight. And Mike actually wrote a really nice piece for us thinking about, well, what do we do about what do kids need to know into the future around AI, and we have to get that right. And then last thing I think is a big complexity that we haven't talked about yet is around special ed enforcement, and just
Hmm.
what's going to happen when, as usual, states and school districts don't deliver on their promises. Will the feds be enforcing special education rules? Probably not. Probably they've already stopped doing it to the degree that they used to. And what do we do about that? All of this, I think, the bottom line here is that I am seeing some states and some localities starting to get organized around these issues and say to their states, their state leaders, here's what we want to see. Here are the policies that could help us on the ground. States, we
Mhm.
want you to start acting on these things. And you can really make a lot of progress on that front.
Fantastic. I want to come back to this in just a minute, but Mike, I want to ask you. We saw the results of the poll, which were interesting, really interesting, I think, and useful. I want to come to you on this question of you're thinking about people making education a bigger issue in the political policy sphere. Meanwhile, we do have this question of declining enrollment, which is part a reflection of just demographic realities, part a options that didn't exist before. As Jean-Claude mentioned way at the top of the show, it's going to have a real impact on money for school districts. This is their daily bread. And so how do we think about all of those things together? And what should we be thinking about, and what should we be watching for in that realm?
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. Look, overwhelmingly, the reason we're seeing these enrollment declines in traditional public schools is because of the baby bust. I mean,
Yeah,
we're just right. The number of babies born every year in America is down something like 15% since its high in 2007. My older son was part of that big 2007 cohort, more babies born in America than ever before, even at the height of the baby boom. And then with the Great Recession, it just went off a cliff and it never came back. So you can see it. You can look at the number of kids in kindergarten, and it's way smaller than the number of kids right now, seniors in high school. So
yeah,
that is a reality. It is, of course, hitting some places harder because you also have movement. A lot of people left
yep,
cities during COVID, for example, decide they wanted to live out in the suburbs. Some people leave in California because of things too expensive, et cetera, et
yep,
cetera.
yep,
Hey, look, the school choice piece is a part of it. I mean, we do know that the charter school sector continues to grow slowly. The homeschooling sector actually went up quite dramatically during COVID and has not come all the way back down. So that's a big factor. And yes, as some people have been noting, private school choice is certainly booming in some states, especially the red states. Now, that piece is still relatively small. I mean, it's tiny compared to the number of kids in charter schools, for example. And
yep,
in many cases, the new state programs are funding families that already had their kids in private schools. So
correct.
we could debate the wisdom of
Right.
that policy, but it's
Yes.
not pulling kids out of public schools. They were already in private schools. So all of that to say, it is a complicated picture. And there's no doubt that it creates pain at the local level. It means you've got to get ahead of this, including closing some schools, ideally closing the lowest performing schools when that's an option, doing some consolidating because the costs are just enormous to keep schools half empty. It's not a good environment for kids or teachers either. So, we got to be aggressive about all of that. On the money, I don't know. I mean, look, in a lot of states, the way the budget works is, there's a line item in the budget about how much money we're going to put into the formula this year. And that may continue to go up even as the number of kids goes down. That will increase per pupil funding, right?
Mhm.
And at the local level, those property taxes are based on property values that in many places are through the roof. So, I don't
Yep.
think we're feeling that terrible pinch quite yet in most places, but it definitely could come. And the more aggressive we are on the front end, the better.
Jean-Claude, I want to ask you a question. I mean, you ran a very large school district. You ran a sort of a medium-sized city district, but um, Mike talks about if there are declining resources or declining numbers of kids, that means probably closing schools. We know that that can be very disruptive in communities and create a tremendous storm of activity that isn't actually about learning. It's more about community centers, important also. Um, but we haven't talked about what happens in rural communities, which already start with small numbers of students. And if that cohort shrinks and if money shrinks, those districts are really in terrible trouble. How do we think about what's ahead for rural school districts?
No, John, it's a great question. I mean, I guess my experience comes from talking to leaders in rural systems from New Mexico to parts of, for example, I don't know, New Hampshire. There's a lot of struggling, not just in terms of population, but even frankly recruiting teachers. There is some level of innovation that I'm seeing. For example, watching organizations support uh, at least through virtual environments, bringing in teachers from outside to a virtual like Zoom, etc. I'm going to name a different country. I saw amazing work happening in Uruguay, for example, where teachers from as far as Argentina were teaching classes in parts of Uruguay in subject areas they could not source people for. So that kind of technology, again, you have to have the infrastructure, broadband and access, etc., which
Yep.
Uruguay I think
Yep.
is fixed. But there
Yep.
are ways of thinking about that kind of innovation to bring that. As an example, I'm thinking about New Mexico when the pandemic hit, kids were sent home, right, with devices, but there was no access to broadband. So these were bricks they gave these kids to actually go home. So thinking about the infrastructure around technology, around access to Wi-Fi, access to broadband, access to devices, can multiply, for example, a math teacher to multiple systems that may be rural. I don't know if you're going to drive people back to these areas, but certainly we can, as a country, build the kinds of systems to supporting the closing of the digital learning gap to have access to good curricula, good teachers. Again, the kinds of consolidation that you have to see happening, but that investment has to happen. I mean, we've seen some of the big broadband companies from the federal government, frankly, with the
Yep.
infrastructure bill
Yep.
under Biden, which frankly needs to go back to be implemented in earnest.
Great. I want to post our second poll now, which is about what people are thinking about in their communities. Part of what's interesting is, what's in between, what's the overlap between what people are thinking about federal policy and local policy. But let's see what people have to say about local and state concerns. But really, as we have shifted from 25 to 26, what I've heard is a lot of talk about things that are going to happen at the state level. And Robin, you introduced a couple of things that I think would be good for us to pursue. One is this idea, where are the places where community leaders can really have a big impact on what's happening? It would be grand, as Mike said, if lots and lots of people cared about these issues. But the reality is that there are, a group of leaders, and they're on this call who care passionately about this. So, what are the places where they can make an impact? And another thing that I think, from my list going into this conversation that we really need to talk more about is AI. What's this going to mean? I think some people think it's the new fairy dust, and it's going to magically solve a lot of problems. Other people think it's the boogeyman, and it's going to mess up everything in schools and in life. Where do you all fall on AI? Robin, you mentioned that Mike had written something interesting about this recently. I hope we can post that and maybe hear a little précis of what Mike had to say. So as we get the results of the poll, let me start with you, Robin, because you raised this notion of how people like like the leaders on this call can really, where are the places where people can really have a big impact that are going to matter for early learning?
Yeah. Um, well, I think there's so much. I really am optimistic about the power of communities to make change, especially right now, because leadership is just really needed, and we have great leaders at the community level. One area that I would say is really ripe for help from folks who care about early literacy and other early learning is on transparency. We can call it accountability too, but it's
Hmm.
really, do parents really understand how their kids are doing in early grades and
Hmm.
throughout? And do
Hmm.
they understand what are the proven interventions that can help them get back on track if their kids are not on track? Let's just start there. That would be great because
Hmm.
most parents don't. Most parents don't know that, and we owe them that. I think it's a
Hmm.
hugely powerful lever for change.
Hmm.
There's more to be said about, good, thoughtful, fair, effective accountability systems, but let's just start with that basic parent transparency. I think that would be a huge win and a place where people can make a difference. I'll say around AI that, the way we viewed AI is it is here, like it or not, and it is going to be a powerful force, like it or not. And there are challenges and there are great opportunities. It really, the future of AI depends on what we do. So we must have communities involved in shaping the future of AI and to start with a vision about what we want education to be in the future, given the realities ahead, and then to try to understand how could AI help us achieve that vision. That's where I think communities can be really influential around the AI debate is, yes, the privacy issues are real and, important. I don't, the questions around cheating and what people call
Sure,
cognitive
sure,
offload, all that stuff.
sure.
But most importantly in my mind is what do we want education to look like and how can AI help? And what will it take to get us there? And we've been doing a lot of work on that front and are starting to surface some visions about what whole schools can look like in the future that are really powered by AI in the sense of enabling adults in the schools to do what we've always wanted them to do, but teach really, really effectively and have fantastic mentoring and support relationships with kids, and help them connect into the jobs of the future, which are going to be changing
Fantastic.
rapidly.
Fantastic. Awesome. Denise, I want to pose two questions to you. One is I want to hear you on AI before we
Mhm.
hear what Mike thinks. And then I want your input on where community leaders like those who are with us today can actually exercise the most influence that is going to make the most difference around early learning.
Yeah, yeah. Robin said it best. Look, if we don't have community input on what students and families and those around us want for the future, and also uh, acknowledging the both values and limits to AI, we need to make sure that that is fully aligned with how school districts are thinking about AI policy. If kids need supports and tutoring, but can't have access to their cell phones, is there a disconnect there? And I also appreciate, the role of social media, get all that. But I do think that having more community say on what that needs to look like so that it is fully aligned with what the district is thinking is just super important. And Jean-Claude also pointed out the challenges we had during the pandemic that still exist now. We still
Sure,
have communities without broadband.
sure.
We still have kiddos that just have their cell phones and do not have laptops or accessibility after school. That's a big deal, and we cannot leave that behind. And I really do fear that if we don't, pay attention to that alongside this alignment with community and school district, we've got, the second and third district divide. So I'm excited because my team is we're about to engage in some youth participatory action research, and we'll be talking to young people about that. So that's going to be super cool. And
We'll be interested to hear the results of
yeah, yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Awesome.
me too. I mean, I've got, y'all know I have two kiddos in public school right now. One who uses AI to come, deal with his facial routine, and the other one who uses it for his exercise routine. So they're all in. I should probably check in more on that. Uh,
We'll
all right.
send you a reminder.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or you
Just
can get AI to set a reminder.
right,
Oh yeah, check
exactly.
in on my kids.
Yeah,
Um,
mom needs to do more there.
y-
Uh, your other question.
Where do people where is it that you want people to really weigh in? Where do you think that community leaders like our friends with us today
Yeah,
can
yeah.
can really have a big impact? Because in my earlier conversation with Robin, she said, teacher preparation and teacher
Mhm.
pipeline, this is a place where not that many people pay attention. But if the community said, "Hey, you know what? We need ed schools to do a better job," and people in the state house heard
Mhm.
that would matter. So I'm looking for places where people can really weigh in and
Yeah,
make
yeah,
a
yeah.
big
Yeah,
impact.
yeah. So I guess, for us, we just want
Yep.
people to weigh in, right? Ed Trust believes that the community is where the power is, and we want to give you that power and we want you to take action.
Hmm.
Uh uh and throughout the states that we're engaged in, like our coalitions who we listen to deeply because they have their thumbs on the scale, they have their ears to the ground, we want to just support them in however they think the biggest sort of challenge facing them.
Yep.
But there's no doubt, like there's a lot of concern right now that uh the accessibility to quality curriculum, like TNTP pointed this out, the unevenness around curriculum through the district, like what one school uses for reading versus another school uses for reading. That's there's such unevenness there. That's a big deal. I remember when I read that TNTP report, I was like, now I need to really pay attention to what my kiddos are having access to, and does the school next door, are they offering a higher and more rigorous level of curriculum? So I think that's a big deal. And certainly as states are trying to do better about the curriculum availability, like, I think our communities need to stay on top of that. Um, the second thing, when it comes to math, and Mike and I our teams have been working on this together, is just access to more rigorous curriculum in math,
Hmm.
access to, you know, uh, making sure that there's more than just the teacher who has say in who gets access to that. Like, what they're doing in Texas, North Carolina, Washington State, trying to do more about this, and Kentucky and Massachusetts, getting more access for more kids so that we know what it means to get to algebra in eighth grade, and are we getting our kids on track for that in fourth and fifth grade? That is something our parents need to know about. And then the last thing I'll offer is we hope to
Yep.
come out this summer with a super cool tool to let parents engage more in, okay, my kiddo is doing this now. What does he or she need to be on track for eighth grade to set them
Nice.
up for success? So we're
Nice.
super excited about that, and stay
Nice.
tuned.
Okay, we will stay tuned. So, Mike, what did you say that was so smart about AI? And I'm interested in AI in education, but I'm also interested in the spirit of this conversation about what we should be thinking about AI policy,
Hmm.
and what the downstream effects are for
Yeah.
education.
Well, it's hard to follow all these great comments. But yeah, what I wrote for Robin was really this question about what it means for what kids learn in school. And my basic argument was that, look, for elementary school kids, I don't think it means much. I mean, I think we're always going to want kids to learn the three R's and how to get along with each other and start learning about history and civics, right? None of that changes. Maybe that's the same for middle schools. High schools, once we get closer to that point where, these kids are going to be out in going to college or out in the
Yep.
real world, then it gets tougher, just like colleges are now really thinking, wow, what does this mean?
Hmm.
If all the coding jobs are going away, what does that mean for our computer science program,
Hmm.
for example, right? If machines can do a lot of the stuff that we used to train people to do,
Sure.
right? So
Sure.
and I also have argued, including in the piece for Robin, that we have this bigger problem with our high school curriculum. We haven't taken a really hard look at that in decades. There was a big push after a nation at risk in 1983, to beef up
Yes.
the high school curriculum, right? And to make kids take more math and reading, math and English and foreign languages and all the rest. And over time, it's grown and grown and grown, and we've added more stuff to it. So now it's, bunch of health classes also, and then it's also financial literacy, and then it's coding for all, and then, but we also want every kid to take some career tech
Sure.
courses. It's
Sure.
too much. I mean, again, for those of us that have high school kids, but you can't fit it all in, right? And then, there's also the complaint that they're not sleeping enough. So I think it'd be very helpful for every state to have some kind of commission, that kind of like a base closing commission, right? Take it out of politics and say, okay, get some diverse group of people from the community to go out and really say which of these courses still make sense given today's economy and where things are heading, and are there some things that can go away, especially so there's more room for kids to do some things they really care about, to go deep, to do
Yep.
apprenticeships and other
Yep.
sorts of experiences around career
Yep.
tech. So that's where I'm at, John. Now, look,
Okay.
that's not so much the focus on the early or learning and the
On
little
your,
kids. I
yeah.
would say on that front, there's been great work that your network has done around the science of reading. And I think that's super critical. I think at the local level, where people have the best impact on their local school boards, there's still just a lot of issues around whether we're going to have high expectations for kids or not. You know,
Yeah.
are we going to continue to just pass kids along through the grades, right, when they're not anywhere near grade level, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we did this after COVID. We're still doing it today. We still have kids coming in behind because they were toddlers and preschoolers during COVID, and we just pass them along, right? Are we going to keep doing that? And what are we going to do to make sure we have high expectations? The messages we're sending to parents, if the kids are getting A's and B's, or they're whatever the equivalent is for elementary school kids, depending on your grading scale, they're going to assume their kid's doing fine, right? And we have this epidemic of grade inflation in this country. We've got to get back to being willing to have to say it like it is, and to be able to tell parents there's a problem. Your kid is not on grade level, and here's the evidence, and we need to do something to fix that.
Yeah, that's really, I think that's really interesting. What's interesting to me is that each of the three of you, and now Jean-Claude, all the pressure's on you, obviously. But that's all right. You're going to bring it home fine. All the three of you, it went not to so much a specific issue that people ought to be zeroing in on, but a much bigger question about, like, what are we doing here? What are we trying to accomplish? Yeah, we can talk about the tools, but we've had so much conversation and turmoil about tools, various strategies, and so forth. But you're all asking a question about what's this fundamental undertaking? What do we want education experience to be? What do we want people to know and to learn and to be able to think about? And then when we know that, and are we prepared to have high expectations for every kid? When we know all that, okay, then what should we do to pursue that, as opposed to, fighting about this thing or that thing, or struggling. And look, we all know what it's like to have a regular job and to pursue things. Then you're in an endless struggle with the district about this issue or that issue, and it consumes you, and you have to do a really good job at it. But it's easy to not focus then on some of the fundamentals. Jean-Claude, I want to come to you. You've been banging the AI drum, both as a skeptic and as an enthusiast, I would say. I'm curious about AI policy, and both at a state, even a local level, and at the federal level, and what that might mean for education, and curious what you think also about what local leaders ought to be focusing on going into 2026.
John, I'll try not to use the rest of our time. As you can
I know
imagine,
you
this
got
is
a lot to say. Go ahead, my
it's a
friend.
big topic of discussion for us at Digital Farmers. Let me start by saying that we just came back maybe late fall. 40 leaders from around the world visited Shanghai, China. We led a meeting at the Eastern China Normal University looking at AI in education. What we saw was a policy, research, to practice to development, and again, not in sequential order, that really swirl in creating infrastructure for education. It was fascinating to see that in Shanghai, where University and AI Institute, 50 learning scientists, 50 computer scientists with the regional Ministry of Education working in tandem to create tools that really lean on the practice of teaching and learning in schools, and that fed it back to these research institutions. The policy framework drove the work, and at the same time, sort of pull back from the practice to changing informed policy. This is China, what many of us think is an autocratic rigid nation, but the fact is that we saw amazing things quickly happening on AI infrastructure. So let me go back to say that, with the states now, I'm hoping states can help do some of this work, and we're going to try to help them do that. But fundamentally, to what's been said before, this is about teaching and learning. And this is one small disagreement here about early learning. Computational thinking in the early learning, early grades is critical to understanding emerging technology and what it means for teaching and learning. I saw this in Talladega County, Alabama, where pre-K classrooms were doing computational thinking work. Across town in a senior level high school class, so honors Shakespeare, honors ELA, doing the exact same thing at a different level. Fayette County, Pennsylvania, doing amazing work, again, across the entire P12 continuum on computational thinking and really teaching young people how to manage machines. And of course, so I'm going to give you some concrete examples, but fundamentally, the question is what we teach, how we teach, what and how we assess is where the tool can really provide some real support. It is not magical thinking. It is really concrete work of really reinventing what we do on teaching and learning. So to that end, some concrete examples. I'm going to give you one in the chat. The UGain Reading Center. This came out of the feds, came out of IES, right? It's a program that we are leading with Penn Grad School of Education, NBRC, school systems around the country, looking at what Gen AI means for the science of reading and how to better support not just emerging readers, but to better support English learners, right? And this is, again, real concrete curricular work being done where teachers and principals are informing the work of technologists and researchers, right? Linguists, technologists, etc. It's a really wonderful thing. Another one I'm going to put for you here in the chat. This came from, again, a coalition of funders led by the Gates Foundation, Valhalla, Schusterman, and others, right? Who are building AI infrastructure. The goal here is not just to support teaching and learning specialists like our educators. This program is going to look to influence the big tech players. We can't just sit back and hope that OpenAI, Google and everyone else will do the right thing. But how do we get learning scientists to work together with folks, with educators, to provide the infrastructure, the data infrastructure to really inform the work of these large language models, small language models, etc. By the way, in China, we saw a bespoke LLM for education called EduChat. Not something that was adopted, built specifically for teachers and principals, right? And school leaders. So the question is, can we actually influence what is happening with these big tech? Again, $26 million at the beginning of this work. There's more to be done, but ultimately, what this has to come down to is the implementation at the regional level. I'm talking about taking a state or maybe a few states in the U.S. working on the policy, working on their implementation with a bunch of school systems for this to be coherently implemented. Again, not as a magical thinking tool, because I've heard school systems when I ask them, what is your AI strategy? And they come back and say, we do magic school. That is not a strategy, that is a vendor, right? So what do you want to teach? What are the kids in front of you? What do you know about learning science? And how are you adapting these schools to support the learners in front of you, to change the narrative around NAEP, to change the narrative around workforce preparedness? All these things come into play, frankly, in how AI could actually get us there. But our educators have to be crew and not passengers in the effort. We got to get our hands in the pot and say, how do we influence the folks who are making decisions here?
Yeah, I would put not only our educators, but our community leaders, which means getting to know about these issues. Like, even if it makes us scrunch up our faces, we got to actually learn about them and we got to engage in them. Mike, I want to come to you for one last question, and then we're almost out of time. You guys have been fantastic, and huge appreciation to all of you. We could talk all day. And I think people would hang with us because it's really interesting. Mike, we sort of know you as the education guy, but you're also the guy who says, hey, there are a lot of other issues that we should be watching that affect how kids and their families are positioned to what the conditions for learning are for them. So I just love it if you would tick off for people some of the non-education non-education issues that are going to affect learning and development that we should be watching in 2026.
Yeah, no, thanks, John. And yeah, you look like I mentioned before, we all know this, right? A lot of what matters to kids and to learning happens outside of school. And when we've made big progress as a country, it's because both, we're doing good things in terms of improving schools and instruction, and because we're doing good things in helping kids and families. And that was the case in the 90s and the 2000s, big progress, for example, on bringing down the child poverty rate. Then we had some struggles again for a while. We've made some progress. Then it's been a little bit of a zigging and zagging.
Yep.
So there are big issues. I mean, right now there's, of course, with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which you can decide whether you like that name. There's more pressure on states, or there's going to be, around healthcare funding and Medicaid funding. And
Yep.
of course, Medicaid is a huge ticket item for states, right up there with education and higher
Yep.
education. So there may be some pressure on the education budget if some states try to backfill what Congress did. And then, of course, we know there's just the terrible scenes that we're seeing every day with the ICE raids. We know this is having a terrible impact on attendance, especially in communities when there is an active campaign going on. Minnesota and some of these districts
Right.
in Minneapolis going to hybrid learning, and so look, this stuff matters. I mean,
Yep. Yep.
I try to be optimistic, but some of that stuff that's happening in the broader social world is pretty tough to watch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and let's
Yeah.
not leave out SNAP, which
I
is
was
going
just
to
going
have
to
a
say
direct
food.
impact
Yes. Yeah.
on uh funding for schools,
Yep.
right? Because
Yep.
so many of our kiddos who get direct certified for SNAP will no longer have that opportunity. And as Mike pointed out, actually Medicaid is what, second or third largest funding for schools.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we can't leave that out either
Yep.
in thinking about the pressures that, governors are going to have. And my other concern, is this federal tax credit. Some governors may see this as a boon to their education budget and may choose to cut funding in other places. And I think we need to be aware of that as well.
Yep. That is great. Robin or Jean-Claude, anything non-specific education that you're watching specifically because of the impact on kids and families?
Robin?
Go ahead,
Good to go.
Robin.
I
Nope.
mean, I guess we've talked enough about AI. That's what I'm watching
Yeah.
carefully and
Yeah. Jean-Claude's going to say that too.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, but
Okay.
but it's also the workforce Pell. For Pell, I'm watching very carefully. Again, education adjacent, giving Pell grants for short-term 8 to 15-week programs.
Yep.
Frankly, what that will mean for preparedness, workforce preparedness for young people, and hopefully that won't take money away from post-secondary support for kids as well. So.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, I want to thank all of you, Mike, Robin, Denise, Jean-Claude. You're all fantastic. I also want to thank those who joined us today. The level of audience participation, I think we moved through a bunch of questions that people asked, but that was great. I had a fantastic time. I learned a lot. I've tons of notes, things to think about, and things to read. So pleased with all of it. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to close us out. But thanks and good day to all of you.
Thanks, John. And just to wrap us up really quickly, I also want to, on behalf of the CGLR, I want to thank John, our masterful moderator, and our expert panelists for their candor, their insight, and their willingness. And thank you to all of you for showing up, asking hard questions, and grounding us in the conversation of what is happening in your communities, and for sharing your favorite books in 2025. So just so you all know, I am going to add to my reading list based on your recommendations: Abundance, All the Colors of the Dark, Atmosphere, The Correspondent, and The Weight of Ink. And so if today reinforced anything, it's that 2026 early learning and closing gaps cannot be treated as side issues, nor can we ignore the importance of local leadership, direct family voice, and high expectations, belief in the potential of our children, and how policies are shaped, implemented, and measured. So we'll be sending you a follow-up with email with all of the resources and highlights soon. But until then, thank you for the work you do every day, and on behalf of children and families, thanks for being part of this community. Thank you.